The Amazon is not a jungle. It is a lie the world has been telling itself for 500 years. Every map, every textbook, every documentary that showed you a blank green mass and called it wilderness was wrong. Not slightly wrong, catastrophically wrong. Because in the last decade, laser beams fired from aircraft have been peeling back that green canvas layer by layer, and what they are finding underneath is so staggering that the scientists doing the scanning keep going quiet for a few seconds before they speak. Cities, roads, canals, earthworks the size of European capitals. An entire chapter of human history that was erased by a catastrophe so total that the jungle swallowed every trace within a single generation. And that is just on the surface. Go deeper, and the Amazon becomes something else entirely. A place where the rules of geology, biology, and common sense seem to have never applied. Start with the fire. Not metaphorical fire, actual, lethal, roaring heat rising from a river in the Peruvian jungle that should not, by any principle of physics a geologist would recognize, exist. Locals in the Mayantuyacu region have known about it for centuries. They call it Shanai Timpishka. The name translates roughly as boiled with the heat of the sun, though the sun has nothing to do with it. Shamans used it in ritual. Healers brought the sick to its banks. But when Andres Russo, a geophysicist who first heard about it from his grandfather as a child in Lima, actually went to find it as a professional scientist, he was not prepared for what he encountered. He expected warm water. What he found was a river that kills. The water temperature runs between 45 and 90 degrees Celsius, depending on the section. At its hottest points, it reaches near boiling. Russo watched an animal, a small bird that had slipped into the water by accident, die in front of him. Its eyes clouded first. Then its feathers began to cook. Then it stopped moving. The river is 25 meters wide in places and 6 meters deep. It moves fast and dark through the forest, surrounded by a permanent shroud of steam. Local people use the cooler margins to brew tea and cook food, but they treat the main channel with a quiet respect reserved for things that will kill you without emotion or warning. The first thing scientists wanted to know was obvious. Where is the volcano? Boiling rivers don't exist without them. Yellowstone's geysers, Iceland's hot springs, Japan's volcanic pools. They all have a magma chamber underneath supplying the heat. But the nearest active volcano to Shanai Timpishka is more than 700 kilometers away. Geologically, that distance is essentially impossible. It is like finding a boiling river in the middle of Illinois and looking for the eruption in Texas. For years, the river existed in a strange scientific limbo. Acknowledged, measured, but not explained. When Russo finally published his research, the answer turned out to be something that geology textbooks rarely discuss: a fault-fed geothermal system of extraordinary scale. Rainwater falls in the high Andes, sinks deep into the crust along ancient fault lines, gets superheated by the planet's own internal thermal gradient, not from magma, but from the sheer depth of the rock above it, and then gets pushed back up under pressure through cracks in the earth, arriving at the surface in the Amazon basin as near boiling water. The Amazon floor acts like the world's most dangerous pressure cooker, and Shanai Timpishka is one of its release valves. It is the largest geothermal river on Earth not associated with volcanic activity. It should not exist, and yet it kills things every day. But that is just the surface. Go 4 kilometers straight down, and the Amazon becomes impossible in an entirely different way. In 2011, a team of researchers at Brazil's National Observatory published a paper that quietly rewrote the hydrology of an entire continent. For decades, Brazil's state oil company had been drilling exploratory boreholes across the Amazon basin, hundreds of them, punching through kilometers of sedimentary rock in search of petroleum. The drillers were looking for oil. What the scientists found instead, when they began analyzing the temperature data from 241 of those boreholes, was something no one had predicted: movement. At 4 kilometers depth, where the rock should be cold, still, and geologically inert, the temperature gradients were behaving as if an enormous volume of water was slowly flowing through porous sandstone. It was a river. A second river, running roughly parallel to the Amazon above it, moving in the same direction, heading for the same ocean. They named it the Hamza River, after the scientist Leah Hamza who led the research team. And here's where the analogy breaks down completely, because the Hamza River is not a river in any conventional sense. It has no banks. It has no current you could feel. It is not a tunnel or a channel. It is more like a continent-scale sponge saturated with water that moves at a speed of only a few centimeters per year through porous rock. But its width reaches 400 kilometers. That is the distance from London to Edinburgh. The Amazon on the surface, for all its legendary scale, is narrower. The Hamza carries water that fell as rain in the Andes thousands of years ago and has been seeping slowly, invisibly, through the bedrock of South America ever since, eventually discharging into the Atlantic, not at the surface, but deep below the seafloor at the continental shelf. For centuries, cartographers drew the Amazon and believed they had mapped the water cycle of South America. They had only mapped the ceiling. Underneath, in total darkness and under crushing pressure, the second river was already there, doing what it had always done. But if the earth beneath the Amazon has been hiding an ocean, the earth at the surface has been hiding something that cuts even closer to the bone: the ruins of the people who lived here. And the story of how those ruins were found and what they mean requires going back 500 years to a man who told the truth and was called a liar for 4 centuries. Francisco de Orellana led the first European descent of the Amazon in 1541, surviving one of the most brutal and desperate river voyages in recorded history. His men were starving. They boiled and ate the leather from their boots. They built a rough brigantine from jungle timber and drifted east, not because they wanted to, but because going back was impossible. And then, as they floated downriver through what should have been unbroken wilderness, Orellana began recording what he saw: cities, not scattered villages, cities strung along the banks in an almost unbroken chain for hundreds of kilometers. Dense populations, wide roads disappearing into the interior, elaborate ceramics, tens of thousands of people watching from the riverbanks as the ragged Spanish boat drifted past. When Orellana returned to Europe and told his story, the response was unanimous. He was dismissed as a fantasist, a liar trying to justify a failed expedition. Every subsequent European who came to the Amazon found only scattered bands of forest dwellers. The cities Orellana had described simply did not exist. Historians spent 4 centuries repeating the established consensus: the Amazon could not support a complex civilization. The soil was wrong. It was a thin skin of organic material over sterile red clay. Clear the forest, plant a crop, and within 2 years, you had a wasteland. You could not feed millions of people in a place like this. It was biologically impossible. Then, almost by accident, the soil told a different story. Pedologists, soil scientists, began noticing strange patches of earth scattered across the Amazon basin. In the middle of the ubiquitous red and yellow clay, they kept finding dark, dense, extraordinarily fertile soil that went down 2 and sometimes 3 meters. It was nothing like the surrounding substrate. Local farmers had known about it for generations because it was fantastically productive and because it did something no other soil did. When you dug out the top layer and sold it, it grew back. Within 20 years, the layer was as deep and rich as before. Carbon dating showed it was thousands of years old, and crucially, it was not natural. The composition, charcoal, fish bones, ceramic fragments, compost, animal waste, was not something geology produces. It was something engineers produce. Scientists named it Terra Preta, Portuguese for dark earth. It was a technology. Ancient Amazonian populations had discovered a method of soil engineering that modern science spent decades trying to reverse engineer and still does not fully understand. They used slow pyrolysis, controlled low-temperature burning, to produce biochar from wood. They mixed that biochar with organic waste, with broken ceramics that provided structure for root systems, with composted material. The charcoal acted as a permanent nutrient sponge. Unlike ordinary compost, which breaks down and washes away in tropical rains, biochar locks nutrients in place for centuries. In this way, the people of the pre-Columbian Amazon transformed one of the most nutrient-poor soils on Earth into something that could feed millions. They turned the clay of the jungle into farmland as rich as the black soils of Ukraine. The scale of the Terra Preta distribution, patches spanning thousands of square kilometers, meant that the civilization which produced it was vast. Orellana had not been lying. He had simply arrived at the end, when 95% of the population was already dead from the smallpox, influenza, and measles that European ships had carried upriver faster than any conquistador could travel. By the time Europeans made systematic maps, the cities were already empty. The jungle, which does not wait, had begun its reclamation. The physical proof of what that civilization actually looked like came in 2024. When archaeologists and their LiDAR systems finally gave the Amazon basin a thorough look from above. LiDAR, light detection and ranging, fires millions of laser pulses per second from aircraft. Those pulses pass through gaps in the forest canopy, hit the ground, and bounce back. A computer strips away every return that corresponds to vegetation, leaving only the returns from the Earth itself. The result is a bare terrain model, a map of the ground as if every tree had been removed. What the LiDAR scans revealed in the Upano Valley of Ecuador and across other regions of the western Amazon stunned everyone involved. In a region long thought to contain a few scattered villages, the scanners found over 6,000 earthen platforms arranged in a planned urban pattern. The platforms had once supported houses, ceremonial buildings, plazas, but the detail that made archaeologists fall silent was the roads, not paths. Roads, dead straight, engineered causeways up to 25 kilometers long, cutting through the jungle in perfect lines. The builders had leveled hills and built embankments to keep the grade constant. The roads connected urban centers to each other and to agricultural zones. Drainage canals ran in precise grids to protect the cities from seasonal flooding. Garden cities, scholars began calling them, urban centers woven into the living forest, alternating built space with agricultural land in a pattern that maintained the ecology while supporting populations estimated at up to 100,000 people in a single valley. Across all of Amazonia, the number may have reached millions. This civilization flourished for 2,500 years. When Rome was building its forum, these cities were already old. We had been camping on their rooftops for centuries and calling it wilderness. The jungle that reclaimed those cities is not a passive backdrop. It is the most productive and dangerous biological system on the planet, and it has been quietly cultivating entities that exist at the boundary between established science and things that make experienced naturalists uncomfortable. In the deep interior, where satellite phones don't work and rivers are the only roads, indigenous communities maintain a consistent and serious account of a creature they call the Mapinguari, not the casual legend that outsiders sometimes assume it to be, a story told to frighten children or impress tourists, but a matter-of-fact description passed between hunters who know every sound in the forest and do not mistake them. The creature they describe is massive, more than 2 meters tall, covered in coarse reddish fur, bipedal in its movement, and equipped with claws that witnesses say can split a palm trunk with a single swipe. There is something else in the descriptions that unsettles zoologists more than the claws. The accounts consistently mention an overwhelming smell, a stench of rot and sulfur so powerful that people lose consciousness. and they describe a sound that comes not from the creature's mouth, but from somewhere lower on its body, a resonant, gut-level noise, unlike any known call. When paleontologists first mapped these descriptions against the fossil record, they found something uncomfortable: a precise match, Megatherium, the giant ground sloth, an animal that officially went extinct 10,000 years ago, that stood 3 meters tall on its hind legs, had recurved claws adapted for pulling down branches, was likely equipped with scent glands for territorial marking, and may have produced low-frequency vocalizations through resonating cavities in its abdomen. The Amazon basin is the one place on Earth where a large mammal could theoretically persist undetected by modern science. Its interior is not just unexplored, it is genuinely impenetrable to systematic survey. The terra firma forest has never been walked in its entirety by any scientific expedition. If the Mapinguari exists, the jungle is not hiding it deliberately. It simply has not been found yet. That is not the same thing as impossible. What is certain and confirmed on video is that the Amazon contains predators for whom the word large is inadequate. The green anaconda, Eunectes murinus, is documented at lengths exceeding 8 meters, with credible reports of specimens approaching 10. In the blackwater rivers of the basin, where visibility is effectively zero and the bottom is soft mud, these animals move in complete silence. The anaconda does not use venom. It does not need to. It constricts. And the mechanism is more precise than the common image of a snake squeezing suggests. The anaconda monitors its prey's heartbeat. It does not crush bones. It waits for an exhaled breath and tightens incrementally, 1 compression, 1 millimeter, each time the chest deflates. The prey cannot inhale against the pressure. The pressure generated by a large specimen is equivalent to placing a fully loaded school bus on a human chest. Death is from asphyxiation, not from trauma. Indigenous communities along the Blackwater tributaries do not swim freely. They enter the water with awareness and caution, understanding that in those rivers they are not the apex predator. The title, "In Those Waters," belongs to something else. One man looked at all of this, the heat, the depth, the jungle, the biology, and decided he could master it through industrial will and American capital. His failure became one of the most expensive and instructive ruins in the Western Hemisphere. Henry Ford, in 1928, owned the largest manufacturing enterprise on Earth and had a rubber problem. Britain controlled the global rubber supply through its Southeast Asian plantations and charged what it wanted. Ford, constitutionally incapable of tolerating dependence on anyone, decided to solve this by building his own rubber plantation in Brazil. He purchased a tract of land the size of an American state. And then he went further. He decided to export not just agriculture, but American civilization itself. Ships crossed the Atlantic carrying prefabricated houses, fire hydrants, water towers, hospital equipment, film projectors for the cinema, and everything necessary to build a model American town at the confluence of the Tapajos and Amazon rivers. The settlement was called Fordlandia. It had paved streets, a golf course, a swimming pool, a hospital better equipped than any in São Paulo, and a strict moral code that Ford, a committed prohibitionist, enforced with company police who searched incoming boats for contraband alcohol. Workers were required to rise at 6 to a factory whistle, eat American food, oatmeal, canned peaches, whole wheat bread, and live by American schedules in an equatorial rainforest where the temperature and humidity made American schedules a form of slow torture. The local workforce, accustomed to river fish, cassava, and the rhythms of the wet season, found the oatmeal particularly insufferable. In July 1930, the cafeteria became a battlefield. Workers smashed equipment, cut wires, and drove the American managers into the jungle. The army was called in to suppress the riot. But the workers' revolt didn't destroy Fordland. Biology did. American engineers planted rubber trees in dense, even rows, like corn in Iowa. They didn't know that in the Amazon, the trees grow wide precisely to protect against pests. On Ford's plantation, they stood branch after branch. Leaf blight passed through them in a matter of weeks. Caterpillars and beetles ate the rest. After nearly 20 years of struggle, having lost hundreds of millions of dollars, Ford's grandson sold the land to the Brazilian government for a pittance. Henry Ford himself never visited Fordland. Today, the water tower rusts above the forest canopy. Vines cover the factory floors. Fire hydrants stand at perfectly American intervals along the streets leading back into the forest. This is the most cherished monument to the idea that nature can be conquered if you simply bring in enough cars.